At the top of any hobby, industry, or niche, two big driving forces can be found: obsession and passion. Obsession can drive someone to consistently analyze and respect the tiniest details, all the way up to building projects of grand scale over many decades. Passion is what gives those projects life and character. The ES-2a electrostatic headphone is a culmination of those driving forces. Let's find out why. Benson of ES Lab kindly started a tour of his latest model, the ES-2a, the successor to their first headphone, the ES-1, which is widely regarded as a love letter to the vintage Stax SR-Lambda. It was well received by the community, with only a few notes for improvement that didn't stop people from enjoying it and accepting ES Lab as a serious maker of electrostatic headphones. After the ES-1, ES Lab has also branched out with the production of an exquisite clone of the Sony MDR-R10, which they call the ES-R10, and has also offered professional servicing and replacement parts for the MDR-R10. I know what some of you are thinking, because I had the very same thought the first time I heard about this. Isn't it just a copy? Take a moment to look at this with some perspective. The original R10 from 1988 and SR-Lambda from 1993 are 37 and 32 years old respectively, well into vintage territory and well out of warranty and the expected servicing period. Compare this to modern counterfeits, where brand new products are copied as cheaply as possible for maximum profit, and the question is answered. No, these are obviously not just copies. This is going so far beyond copying that even suggesting it is kind of an insult. At a glance, the fundamental shape and size is pretty much identical to the original SR-Lambda, but if you look closely, there are some differing details, such as the slick cable entry and the wider headband forks. It's clear that the goal here was not to copy directly. There are actually several more design improvements that can be observed. This includes improved PU leather ear pads, which offer a more cavernous space inside the pads than the Stax originals. My ears don't touch any part of the ear pads, and their shape gives me a very ergonomic fit and a fabulous bass seal. There are also no sharp edges anywhere, indicating that each part has been properly processed and finished. Thanks to the absolute most transparent driver protection, which is to say almost none, the driver is on full display on the rear, protected only with the thin painted woven mesh grills. On the ear side, there are removable or replaceable dust and hair filters, but a much more open grille protecting the driver. One thing I almost always forget is how much lighter electrostatic headphones are compared to planars. So at 450 grams, they actually feel light for their size, and while they don't quite melt away when worn, I count them among the most comfortable headphones I've ever worn. The cable is overall thinner, lighter, and more manageable than any other electrostatic headphone I've ever used, and has a chunky, grippy, rubber-coated plug housing, so bonus points there. As electrostatics generally go, these are on the bassier end of the scale. They may well be the second most naturally bass competent E-stat in the whole world, and from memory they fall in place just behind the Sennheiser HE1. The perfect trinity of the bass peaking at 50 Hz and remaining largely linear overall, the huge 90mm drivers with an active diameter of around 75mm, and the large cavernous earpads make these sound kind of huge. I can only count on one hand the number of modern conventional headphones that have a bigger soundstage than this. There really isn't getting much bigger than this without going the AKG K1000 or DSP route. Then, adding another layer to that, remember how open these headphones are? And you've just got this effortless, wide soundstage that doesn't have a particular shape. It just sounds like it fills your headspace completely and spherically with very precise imaging. Then, if you're feeling a bit naughty, you can remove the ear side dust filters for one of the most open, exposed headphone experiences, although it's not something I personally condone. Conversely, leaving the dust filters on does take a bit of the hard edge off, making an incrementally smoother sound, which may be preferable. Treble is very well balanced, with typical electrostatic speed, air, and is kind of tuned perfectly in the way that it is only piercing when I play music that I know is recorded or mastered with piercing treble, such as Creep by Radiohead. Bass is just north of classic vintage neutral, so while it's still not Harmon, it's in that perfect middle zone where it's not quite enough for some electronic, but always has enough for everything else. The bass timbre is extremely natural and textured. Listening to Blast Beat Falafel by Igor, there is an extremely fast bass guitar popping segment 18 seconds in, which is just perfectly layered and separated and only missing the slightest punch, which can be remedied with a small bass boost. I personally use the Fuzzy Audio SK01 as preamp tone control for my SR-Lambda, which can actually take a surprising amount of bass boost. Unfortunately, the ES-2a can only take about 20 to 50% shelf boost from the SK01 before distortion is audible on very bass-heavy tracks. So while it's naturally a bassier headphone, it's maybe not as versatile as a few others. In reality, a 20% boost is more than enough for most music, and with lighter music, a bigger bass boost can be made without any issues. The mid-range is the only part of the sound that has me stroking the proverbial beard. E-Stat gang will know what I mean when I say that the mid-range sounds a few steps back compared to the bass and treble. It's not quieter, it's just not as impactful or immediate as I'm used to hearing, and perhaps a little grainy or under-textured. To make some comparisons, let's start with the coldest research RR1. When switching to the RR1, it accentuates what I've observed. The RR1 mid-range is practically flawless, with immediacy, intimacy, and an extremely even presentation that just oozes objective correctness. Switching back to the ES-2a, you get the sense that it's sacrificing ultimate fidelity in favor of a emotional musical performance. I know some of you hate that phrase, but there it is. It's just such a contrast. Neither are wrong, as they both have their place depending on the music and mood, but what I know for certain is that maintaining the level of fidelity exhibited by the RR1 in a headphone with as much personality and scale as the ES-2a has been historically proven to be something of a unicorn. The RR1 is missing the huge scale and deepest sub-bass slam of the ES-2a, but makes up for it with sublime mid-range and treble timbre and tuning. Next, the SR-Lambda normal bias. Tonally, the ES-2a is warmer than my modified SR-Lambda normal bias version, so you get just that little bit more body in the mid-range, which not only sounds more natural, but is also easier on the ears. I do love my SR-Lambda, but it has a hard, dry leading edge to every note that does get fatiguing faster than other headphones, even after tone correction. In terms of staging, the taller shape of the rectangular Lambda does give them a taller stage, but what little more it has in height is trumped by a width of the ES-2a, which just sounds more complete. Of course, the Lambda can't compete in raw details either, but after a little tone correction, very few E-Stats can compete with the Lambda's combination of smoothness, tone, and soundstage. Nudging the treble down a notch, the ES-2a manages to emulate it quite well, with an edge on overall experience, which just again sounds more complete. One very important thing of note is that while switching between headphones, it was obvious how much more sensitive the ES-2a is than my other headphones, and from memory, significantly more sensitive than the SR-007. The SRM-T1 is powering it very comfortably at 9 o'clock with plenty of headroom to spare. Going back to my memories of the SR-007, which I reviewed earlier this year, I can say with certainty that I prefer the ES-2a. It doesn't have the same high-pressure feeling I got from the 007 and is tuned much closer to my taste with a significantly better sub-bass performance. The ES-2a is masterfully tuned with a relaxed mid-range. It has imaging and soundstage that is equaled by few and surpassed by even fewer. The build and finish are just about at the highest standards I could expect while adhering to the source material inspiration. At this price, there is almost nothing to complain about beyond small differences in personal taste and the relatively simple construction. And with so many headphones exceeding this price point that rarely offer more and more than occasionally offer far less, I'm tempted to give this headphone my fullest recommendation. I feel like the real test of a product is how often I want to listen to it, how difficult it is to put down, and in this case, it being on tour, how much will I miss it once it's gone? I'm checking almost every box to the maximum. There's another great metric I can personally measure this headphone by. For someone in my privileged position, having heard almost every single great headphone ever made since the 1970s until today, the ES-2a is doing a very rare thing of more deeply connecting me with the music. It just gets out of the way and allows me to forget about the source chain or even the headphone itself. It's among the most wholly complete high-end headphone experiences I've ever heard at any price that does not need expensive source gear to sound great. That's it for now. Take it easy and I'll see you in the next one.